In this Diablo 4 video, I'm going to be showing you my Stormwolf build. This is a beginner druid leveling build that's aimed for world tiers 1 and 2 of the game and takes a combination of werewolf and lightning skills and kind of puts them together to make one fantastic leveling build. People have been asking me, like, what is the best build for leveling? Is it Storm? Is it Werewolf? Is it Werebear? In my opinion, this is probably the best all-around leveling build that'll get you up to endgame or, through world tiers 1 and 2. It'll get you to World Tier 3. And you can see in this video, too, that I don't have very good gear. I have had maybe one good drop the whole way, and I'm still doing very, very well. So let's talk a bit about how this build works. First, we have Storm Strike as our melee skill, and this is really good for spirit generation. Has a decent lucky hit chance. It hits multiple enemies in front of you. It gives you damage reduction for 3 seconds after you deal damage with it, which helps to keep you alive and make you tanky. And it can also set vulnerable with the upgrade that we have, which allows you to deal increased damage to enemies. So when you're like facing a lone elite or a lone boss, you should make sure you're alternating between Lightning Storm and this in order to set that vulnerable and to increase your damage to them. Next we have Lightning Storm, which is our core skill for this build, and this works as a channel. If you hold it down, more and more lightning bolts will come out. And if you do not cast this skill after about 4 seconds or so, it'll go back down to 1 lightning bolt. So the longer you hold it down, the more lightning bolts are going to come out to a cap of 5, and then if you stop casting it for 4 seconds, you're going to run out. So you want to alternate between Storm Strike and this to try and keep up your spirit enough to keep this going every 4 seconds or so when you're in combat. It's not always possible, but that's what you're aiming for. And I've taken the upgrade here that gives you an 8% chance to immobilize enemies when you're casting this. Once you have like 4 or 5 bolts out, this tends to be like every other cast or every cast you'll immobilize something. And as a druid, you get a lot of extra damage to immobilized enemies. Staves by default have extra damage to crowd-controlled enemies, and immobilized is considered crowd control. You also have the electric shock and bad omen passives that will boost your damage against immobilized enemies. Eventually, these will be maxed out. And the perfect storm key passive will also increase your damage against immobilized enemies as well as slowed enemies. So immobilize is really your best friend as a lightning druid, trying to get as much damage against this status effect as possible, and if not that, then at least something like slowed in order to get that benefit from the staff and from the key passive as well. And that brings us to our next skill, Poison Creeper, which synergizes extremely well here because this is a large AoE that roots things in place, immobilizes them. So you're going to get that extra damage to them while they're immobilized because of these passives I mentioned, and they also are going to take poison damage over time, and it's a pretty substantial amount early on in the game. So this is going to soften them up while you Lightning Storm them down. And once you've taken the Brutal Poison Creeper upgrade, it's also going to increase your critical strike chance against enemies that are rooted in place here by 20%. So that's a huge amount of critical strike chance you're going to get on top of all the other critical strike you have. And this synergizes extremely nicely with the Envenom passive, which increases your critical strike damage to enemies that are poisoned. Once you max this out, this will be 30%, so you'll gain an extra 30% damage when you critically strike against enemies that have been poisoned. This is one of the ways you do that. Rabies is the other way. Now, Rabies is going to set poison on a bunch of enemies in front of you, kind of in a small cone. Be careful, though, because it can easily miss enemies if you don't position it correctly, and sometimes it'll just miss anyway. But this poison deals substantial damage, and it's going to transfer from target to target. And what I really like to do with this is I like to put it on a target and then start dragging that target with me to a bunch of enemies, and you'll just see that Rabies jump from target to target, especially since we have the upgrade that makes it transfer more quickly. And you don't want it to be shortened in this case. If you take the other morph, then it's harder to drag enemies. So you actually want it to last longer if possible. And you're going to drag enemies into other enemies, and this is just going to spread all over the place, and it's going to deal a lot of damage, and then you're free to use like Poison Creeper, root them in place, and then go to town with your Lightning Storm. And another good passive to pick up, because we use both Rabies and Poison Creeper, is the Neurotoxin passive. This makes it so that when you poison enemies, they become slowed. This is important because enemies that are slowed are considered crowd controlled, so your staff gives you extra damage against crowd controlled, so now you do extra damage against these poisoned enemies anytime they're poisoned, because they're by default going to be slowed. And also because of the key passive Perfect Storm, you're going to gain extra damage to slowed enemies as well. So our defensive skill for this build is Blood Howl, and I like this because it's a heal, so it can heal you, and it comes off cooldown quickly when you kill enemies, so the more you kill enemies, the faster you're going to be able to heal. But I really like about this is the upgrade we have here makes it so that when you use it, you gain 20 spirit. Druids are extremely spirit hungry at the beginning of the game, and Blood Howl is a way to help them get more spirit, particularly when you're running around in a dungeon and you're looking for enemies or you're backtracking. You can keep popping this to keep increasing your spirit as you move around. And one good legendary aspect you should be on the lookout for is Night Howler's aspect. This increases your critical strike chance out of you, your companions, and any players near you for 3 seconds. Every time you use this up to 10%, and if you put this on an amulet, then it'd be 15%, and if you put it on a two-handed weapon like your staff, this would be 20%. That is a huge amount, particularly since you tend to reduce the cooldown of Blood Howl by killing things rapidly, especially if you have high critical chance. So this kind of allows you to keep fueling, you know, more Blood Howls equals more Spirit equals more critical strike chance, and it funnels really, really well. If you're not lucky enough to get this from a drop, you can get it from completing the Forbidden City dungeon and getting it from the Codex of Power that way, even though it'll be a little bit less effective than the max roll, obviously. And then lastly, we come to our ultimate ability, Cataclysm, which kind of puts tornadoes and lightning bolts all over the map. This thing does huge damage. It is a room clear. It is one of the best ultimates in the game. It has extremely long cooldown. But anytime you find yourself in a sticky situation, you want to be popping this before you go to town. This is absolutely going to help you, you know, get through tough situations, get through boss fights, get through elite pulls, and it's really, really good. Another legendary aspect I highly recommend getting is the aspect of the Protector. This gives you a damage shield or a barrier anytime you fight an elite. And you can see from the gameplay that I get some pretty big hits here just at beginning these trash pulls from some of these hard-hitting enemies like the trees and the bears. And a lot of that would be negated when I have that aspect, but I don't have it here. I could easily go and get that from the Codex of Power, because that is one you can find very early on in the game. You can find this one by completing the Lost Archives dungeon. It's just south of Kyobashad. This one is very, very easy to find. Another good aspect to be on the lookout for is the aspect of the Inner Calm. This makes it so that you increase your damage up to 10% per second for each second you stand still, up to 30%. So every second it would add up 10%. If you get max roll on it, if you're going by Codex of Power, by doing the Wraithwind Wilds dungeon in Skazglen, then they would be 15%. But you tend to stand still a lot while you're casting Lightning Storm, so this is a really, really good one to have as well for boosting your damage. And then lastly here, aspect of the Umbral will make it so that you gain resources of your primary resource whenever you crowd control an enemy. This one's very hard to find early on, but you can get the Codex from Power from the Champion's Demise and the Dry Steppes. And it'll give you 1 if you do that, which is not a lot, but it's better than nothing, considering how the spirit issues you have, and any poison you apply will give you at least 1 per target that back, which is great. But if you have like maybe an alt or something that has a version of this that, you know, that can give you like a level 30 or a level 25 version or something, this is really, really strong. This will make your leveling a lot faster, but you can at least get a lower version of this. Now, there are obviously a lot of other aspects that involve lightning and stuff like that, but a lot of them are not early on in the game, and you won't find them till later in the campaign, or, you know, you're going to have to get a lucky drop to get some of them, so I didn't mention them here. But just this setup alone works really, really well. And for Spirit Boons, when it comes to the Stag, I like Wariness. This reduces the damage you take from elites by 10%. That's a huge amount, and that's going to help keep you alive during some of the harder pulls. And I've bonded to the Eagle in order to get Scythe, Talons, and Avian Wrath. This further boosts your critical chance by 5% and critical strike damage by 30%. You can tell we have a theme here. Critical damage, we got Brutal Poison Creeper giving you 20%. You've got Night Howler's Aspect giving you up to 20%, and you've got the Inventive passive increasing your critical strike damage against poison enemies, so you really want both of these if possible. On the Wolf, I have Energized. This makes it so that if you lucky hit anytime you deal damage, it has up to a 15% chance to restore 10 Spirit. Again, Druids are very Spirit hungry at the beginning of the game, so this is good to have early on. And lastly, on the Snake, I have Overload. This makes it so that when you lucky hit when dealing lightning damage, you have a 20% chance to cause the target to emit lightning damage to surrounding enemies, helping with your AoE damage a little bit. Passives you want to focus on are Defiance. This makes it so your nature magic skills deal 12% increased damage to elites. So this means your Lightning Storm's going to deal more damage, Storm Strike's going to do more damage when you're attacking elites. This is great, because that's when you really need extra damage. Circle of Life makes it so that when you use a nature magic skill, in this case Lightning Storm, it heals you for 3% of your max life. This is good for keeping your health topped off in, you know, long fights where you're attacking lots of enemies. Bad Omen is also really, really good to max out early. This makes it so that when you lucky hit, up to a 30% chance when you deal damage to a vulnerable, immobilized, or stunned enemy, that a lightning bolt deals extra damage for 55% of your weapon damage at max rank. This is a lot of damage. You're dealing damage to vulnerable enemies constantly because of Storm Strike, or immobilized because of Poison Creeper. So this is a great way to get out extra damage early on in the game, and you definitely want to max this one as soon as you can. I've also maxed both Rabies and Lightning Storm to get as much damage out of those skills as I can as well. And then lastly, I have the Clarity passive, and this is really good because it gives you 6 Spirit when you transform into human form. So if you transform into werewolf form to use Blood Howl and then back, you're going to gain 6 Spirit. You'll just naturally change back after a couple seconds. Or if you use Rabies and then change back, you'll gain 6 Spirit. Again, Spirit is a problem for Druids early game. So this is a good way to get some extra Spirit. You won't get as much as if you were using like a Werewolf build that is using Storm Strike going back and forth more quickly, but you're still going to get some out of it, and you need that Spirit in order to keep casting. So that wraps up our early game leveling Stormwolf build. I imagine this build will look a lot different at level 50 plus, level 50 to 60, and I will have an updated version of that. But people have been asking me for a good Druid leveling build. I think this one is very, very efficient. It's very effective. Doesn't have as much Spirit problems as some other Druid builds do. I wouldn't say it's completely solved, but it gets the job done and it does it pretty well. Stay tuned for more Diablo 4 build guides, as we have another Rogue build and another Necromancer build coming at level 50+, and we're getting closer and closer to getting 70+ level builds that are going to be focused on World Tier 4.